Pacific Rim Uprising is the 5-year-awaited sequel to the 2013 film Pacific Rim, directed by Guillermo del Toro. This one is not directed by him, however, because he was shooting his Best Picture winner. This one is directed by Stephen S. DeKnight. Takes place a couple years after the ending of the first Pacific Rim. The breach has been closed, kaiju invasion kaput, and the Jaegers are now utilized as just kind of guards. They're watching over the cities, making sure, just in case, another kaiju invasion happens, and also stopping just various crimes. And Jake Pentecost, son of Stacker Pentecost from the first film, is now living a life of crime in this changed world that they live in because of the kaiju invasion, and through some circumstances he ends up back into the Jaeger program with Nate Lambert, played by Scott Eastwood, and their jobs are to help train these new young cadets who are trying to be Jaeger pilots. They're trying to train them to be suitable enough for these Jaegers just in case another attack comes along. I'm actually a big fan of the first Pacific Rim movie. I know some people may just think it's okay, but I actually genuinely really do enjoy that film. Still do, ever since I saw it in 2013. I even have that poster in the back corner, and even though Guillermo del Toro wasn't coming back to direct, I still had some hopes because Stephen S. DeKnight worked on some shows like Spartacus and Daredevil on Netflix, and those are really awesome, and I wanted to see what he could do with this film. And of course you have John Boyega joining the cast and also producing the film, which seemed really awesome. I wanted to see what they could do with that. And when the promotional stuff started to come out, I was getting really hyped up again to get back into this world that I was a big supporter of when it came to making a franchise out of it. I wanted to see where else they could go with the story. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with the Pacific Rim series? Apparently everything. I walked out of this film hating it, more than I thought I would. Jesus Christ. I had to wait a couple days before I saw it. I was a little busy the weekend it came out, but I heard the reactions from the critics and also from a group of my friends saying yeah, it's kind of bad. And I was thinking oh, well, that's a bummer. Well, I'm sure there's some guilty pleasureness in there somewhere, but I walked out of this movie hating it more than I thought I would. It's kind of a betrayal of what made the first Pacific Rim movie so special. And I feel really bad now because I grabbed this poster at my local movie theater thinking maybe it could be good, and then, reviews came out and then I saw it, and now I just had this poster, admittedly cool poster, for a really terrible movie in my house. What am I going to do with that now? I'm not going to hang it up. What am I going to do with a Pacific Rim Uprising poster? Now, there are some good things about this movie, and I'm going to mention them really briefly. The kaiju, they are the most consistent when it comes to the visuals in this film. When they showed up, finally, their designs were killer. They looked great in the CG. They looked really convincing on screen. And also, the fight scenes, by design, admittedly cool. There are certain moves that they do that, from a guilty pleasure angle, they could be seen as really entertaining. And I thought to myself for a little bit, and I was like, if I had just watched these action scenes, I didn't have to watch the rest of the movie, but if I just pulled up the action scene on YouTube, would I be entertained? And I was thinking, probably, because I wouldn't have the rest of the movie's context. But those are pretty much my only positives with this film. And that one positive I mentioned, the action scenes sometimes being cool, here's the thing. I'm going to talk about Pacific Rim 1 for a little bit. What made that movie so great was that Guillermo del Toro, genuinely wanted to just make a tribute to a bunch of his favorite, kaiju movies. He wanted to make something that was inspired by something he loved. He wanted to put a lot of heart into Pacific Rim, and that's what he did, and that's why I love that movie so much. Because you can feel the amount of heart that went into that project from Guillermo del Toro. This film feels completely studio managed. They may have a director in the director's chair, but believe me, he's just a yes man to the studio. Whatever the studio wants him to do, he'll just do it. Basically, that was kind of confirmed for me when I saw an interview where Stephen S. DeKnight was like, well, I wrote a thriller script with maybe 3 people, but studio turned that down, but then they asked me if I could do Pacific Rim, and I was like, yeah, I'll do it. Basically, he just admitted that he had no real passion to make a Pacific Rim movie, but the studio just asked him after they turned down the real project that he was working on, so yay! And I really feel bad for Stephen S. DeKnight because I like what he's done with some TV, but this just proves that he was not ready to make that leap into big blockbuster filmmaking, because this movie has some pretty poor direction, some pretty bad editing, and the action sequences do not really work for me as much as the first Pacific Rim. Now, technically speaking, there are bigger action moments in this film than the first Pacific Rim, so that's kind of obvious, and some people may say the action's much better this time around. But I look at the first Pacific Rim, and what I love about those action sequences is that Guillermo del Toro didn't try to make everything cool. He just kind of knew that it was cool to see monsters fighting robots in general. So anything that happened, it was just, well, that's just because it's naturally cool. In this movie, though, the way they move the Jaegers, the way they make them faster, having them include the special moves that they do, it's very desperate. This entire film reeks of desperation, and I think it's because the first Pacific Rim didn't do, like, gangbusters at the box office. It made enough for a sequel, but it wasn't like this huge hit that they were expecting. So I think the way they handled this movie was, alright, let's try to make it as cool as possible, get as many people into the seats as we can. We need to franchise this to the max! But by trying to get more people into the seats, you completely contradicted what made the first Pacific Rim so special. Guillermo del Toro crafted those action sequences intelligently. These are giant robots. They're not going to move as quickly as maybe a human would. Even Striker Eureka, who was said to be the fastest Jaeger in that movie, he still was fast enough for a giant robot, but he wasn't like super fast like the Jaegers you see in this film. And also the Jaegers for the first Pacific Rim, visually gorgeous. Like, they look so tangible, like you could reach out and touch them, especially if you saw it in that theater, in that IMAX theater, glorious 3D. In this film, it lacks so much of what made the visuals great about the first Pacific Rim. The Jaegers look too polished. They look too smooth, and sure, they're, like, great designs, like, sure, but I'm thinking of another comparison between, like, 1 and 3 of Transformers, and then 4 and 5. 1 and 3, they looked, like, tangible, like they actually looked like they were made of the vehicles, and they actually looked real in that world. Then you cut to Transformers Age of Extinction and The Last Night, and they look very smooth and very polished, basically conveying a feeling of they're not actually there, but they look pretty shiny and cool, don't they? Kind of the same with Pacific Rim, minus the kaiju, which I thought looked very good, like the same as they did in the first Pacific Rim. The Jaegers are so polished that it doesn't look like something that you could tangibly go out and touch, unless there's like a miniature set that looks like the Jaeger, then yeah, that looks real, because it's a thing they made. But the visual style of this film, you really feel the loss of Guillermo del Toro. Guillermo del Toro has such a great eye for visuals, and in this film, it's lacking so much of what made the first film just so visually impressive. Like, that is one of the better looking blockbusters out there, maybe even the best looking blockbuster out there. Then you have this sequel that just looks like any other generic blockbuster film out there. It's like, oh, well, at least the kaiju look pretty cool. And even with the kaiju looking cool, what was the main premise of the first Pacific Rim? Kaiju versus Jaeger. In this movie, though, the kaiju, everything you've seen in the trailers, they're so, like, third act. Like, everything in the trailers is pretty much in the third act. So I was watching this movie thinking, well, this is kind of cool, but I've seen this already. And that's how minimal the kaiju really felt in this film, and it leads to a bigger disappointment I had. I was hoping for, like, more action with them in this film. Instead of more action sequences that are cool and amazing and stuff they don't show in the trailers and spoil, we get more of the story. And oh my god, if you thought the story to the first Pacific Rim was bad, you ain't seen nothing yet! Like I said earlier, this movie just reeks of desperation so much that you can kind of pinpoint every corporate move to try to build this into a franchise instead of trying to feel genuine with it like the first Pacific Rim did. And like I said earlier, I was a big supporter of Pacific Rim becoming a franchise, of making more films, but with this movie they did everything wrong that now I regret even thinking that. And even when it comes to the character writing, very weak. You thought the characters in the first Pacific Rim were bad. Oh my god, this film just completely tops that in horrible character department. I was excited to see John Boyega's Jake Pentecost. I thought maybe he could do a good job playing Idris Elba's son. In this movie, a very generic kind of writing, just, oh, I wasn't able to prove my dad wrong when he said I wasn't capable of doing this, and now I live a life of crime, and I'm always doing the wrong thing now because of that. Like, oh, you're gonna go that route with the character, not gonna go somewhere, I don't know, maybe more interesting? Now, they do try to expand the world in that respect, and that's one thing I can say was a good attempt, sort of. But even when they try to do that, the characters that they're showing suck so much. Like the character Amari, a lot of people are comparing her to Rey. I'm honestly going to compare her more to Isabella in Transformers The Last Knight. Basically, her scrapper Jaeger is basically Squeaks in that sense from Transformers 5. And you know what? Her backstory is pretty much the same as Isabella's from Transformers The Last Knight 2. Parents are killed, now I'm on my own with this rogue Jaeger, like, oh, so it's Transformers 5. You see what I mean when I'm talking about how calculated this all feels? Nothing about the script sparks any interest. Nothing in the script sparks anything original either. It's just a lot of derivative stuff that you've seen before, and a lot of stuff that the company behind this movie knows more people would want to see and pay for, and that's why they're putting it in the movie solely to make a profit instead of just being genuine. I don't know what the deal with Scott Eastwood is, because he's honestly one of my least favorite actors working right now. He's going from Suicide Squad to being one of my least favorite parts of The Fate of the Furious, and now this. Like, he's better in this than Fate of the Furious, I think. But even then, it's like there's not really that much to his character other than, well, me and John Boyega didn't get along in Jaeger Academy, and we fought a bunch, and now we gotta work together. Oh, I don't like you, but now we gotta work together, so hey, we're gonna bond now. Like, it's that. It's just that. It's just that generic. And they don't go in any interesting direction with that. They don't try to do anything new. It's just, they don't like each other. They're gonna work together. Maybe they're gonna be friends now. That's it. Oh, actually, no, there's one other thing about them. They introduce a love interest named Jules, who could be in love with Scott Eastwood, but maybe she's in love with John Boyega too. She's barely in the movie, but she's in it, and they make sure to point her out whenever she's nearby as an important part of the story. She's literally just there to be eye candy for the two guys and also to just have the two guys keep fighting. And the Academy students as well, that could have been interesting if you just started off with someone trying to get into the Jaeger Academy, trying to raise up in the ranks, and then a kaiju comes out and they have to really prove themselves that way. That could have been interesting at least, but instead, not only are they barely focused on, but it's a lot of just cliche stuff. You have a bunch of the cool guys, you have the guy who gets picked on a bit like, hey, you're only gonna get one Jaeger at your funeral, kid. And then there's the girl who doesn't like the main girl, Amari, because, I'm jealous of you because you got in here off of luck while I had to do hard work. Like, it's just a bunch of cliches everywhere in this script. But of course, these are all the new characters. I'm only talking about new characters here. What about our old characters, our returning folks? Well, Mako shows back up. Yeah, she was a good character in the first movie. Barely anything to do in this movie, and once you see why she was in the movie, kind of pointless, and is basically just there because they could actually get her while Charlie Hunnam was off filming King Arthur, Legend of the Sword. And speaking of Charlie Hunnam, even though Mako is in this movie, and clearly Mako and him had a relationship in the first movie, they never mention Charlie Hunnam once. They only reference his name, Raleigh Beckett, in passing. Like talking about, like, our hero stood here back in the day. Idris Elba, Mako, and Charlie Hunnam. And then they move on. They're like, hey, whatever happened to Charlie Hunnam? They don't even ask. Just move on. They show, like, a bunch of pictures of older people like Mako and Idris Elba along this wall. Don't show Charlie Hunnam, though! But the characters played by Charlie Day and Bern Gorman, I was actually interested to see them back. I thought they were a bright spot in the first Pacific Rim movie, especially Charlie Day, because he had a lot to do in that one that I really appreciated. In this movie, they're not funny. They're overused, their chemistry is off somehow, even though I thought they worked really well together in the first movie. And not only do they just not work together humor-wise and just character-wise, but also, Charlie Day being one of my most surprising parts about the first movie, he's also another surprising part about this movie, except not in a good way like the first one. I can't even spoil it. Like, it's actually like an integral part of the plot, the direction they take his character, what they do. It's a shift. It's a shift from what they did in the first movie. Kind of ruins what made him so special in the first movie. But they needed this. They needed a story somehow. So they have Charlie Day doing something that is so bad and so laughable, and I was amazed. You're just gonna have to go see it. Like, I don't want anyone to go see this movie because it sucks, but you're just gonna have to see the movie to understand what I'm talking about. So basically, none of the characters worked for me on any level. A humor level? No, the humor is cringy. I honestly didn't hear, like, any laughs coming from my theater. Maybe one. But, like, almost no one in my theater was laughing at any of the humor in this movie. And none of the characters were that interesting, none of the backstories they tried to set up. Like, the way they revealed Amari's tragic past is basically the same way they revealed what happened to Mako in the first film. Like, cutting back to, like, even the same dialogue of, like, hey, this is all in your head. Like, they just copy and pasted the scene, just replaced Just replace the actors. I didn't think anyone had any good chemistry in this movie, and none of the performances were sturdy enough for me to be like, even though they're not funny and the character's not interesting, that performance is standing out. Like, no! Like, nothing, and not even the action sequences can save it. The visual effects, aside from the kaiju, were so bad in this movie. Not a fan of that at all, and the action sequences itself reeked of desperation. The score is not as good as Raman Djawadi's from the first movie. Lorne Balfe is a composer that I've grown to admire a lot recently, and his score for this movie just felt completely generic, and it didn't have that same spark that the first movie's score had. There's even a scene where they have the main theme from the first movie come back, but it's in, like, not only a horribly edited and horribly CG'd scene, but it's, like, not even, like, a good moment of, like, yeah, we're gonna rise up. It's just kind of like at this moment of, oh, I guess they're rising up now. Yeah. And the ending of this movie basically has two endings, and I won't spoil them, don't freaking worry, but let's just say the first ending, basically, they do what they gotta do, and then, like, they take 5 seconds to be like, alright, we're good? We're good? Alright, let's wrap up. And then they show the title card. But then they have a Tomb Raider-style post-credit scene, basically, it just comes up after the title, where they basically have an Independence Day resurgence moment, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. You're doing this. You actually pulled an Independence Day resurgence. What is this movie? Guys, I really wanted to support this movie. I wanted to walk out saying, you know what, it's getting a bad rap, but I enjoyed it. I'm glad that they're making more of these movies. I can't say that after this one. I'm ashamed that I even said that I wanted more Pacific Rim movies. They should have just left the first one as is, because this was a huge mistake. Unfortunately, guys, I've got to give Pacific Rim Uprising a D. Besides from the kaiju designs and the way they looked visually, and also some just cool moments that are just naturally going to be there, a lot of this movie just reeks of that corporate kind of like, oh, you like this, right? You want to see more of this, right? Give us more money? And that is so disingenuous to me that I cannot attach to this film the same way I did that first film. Guillermo del Toro, if you want to come back to make a third one, or any other one, like, that would be fantastic. Because clearly Guillermo del Toro has the right vision for Pacific Rim, instead of just the guy who you just asked, like, hey, you just want to do this movie? And he was just like, oh, okay, sure, I got nothing else going on. The characters could have been much better. The story, the writing, humor, music, action could have been so much better. Just because the action is more flashy and more vibrant with colors and polished looks doesn't make it better, and it doesn't make it look as visually impressive as that first film. In fact, it's amazing to me how a 2013 movie has better CGI than a movie in 2018. And better fights, too. But if you've seen Pacific Rim Uprising, leave in the comments below what you thought of it. And as always, thank you guys for watching. Make sure to subscribe. I'm Jackson Fulcher. See you guys next time.